The emergency radio crackled to life at 11:47 p.m. "We need someone small enough to crawl through the ventilation system. The building's about to collapse, and there are 17 people trapped inside." Detective Sarah Mitchell looked down at her 5 feet 2 inches frame and size 6 hands as the SWAT commander's eyes swept past her toward the male officers. What happened next would change everything anyone thought they knew about what it takes to be a hero. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Riverside Financial Tower stood 32 stories above downtown Portland, its glass facade reflecting the emergency lights that painted the street below in urgent reds and blues. Detective Sarah Mitchell arrived at the scene expecting a routine building evacuation, perhaps a gas leak or electrical fire. Instead, she found herself staring up at what would become the most challenging night of her 8-year career in law enforcement. The call came in at 10:15 p.m. A structural engineer conducting late-night inspections had discovered critical support beams showing signs of imminent failure on floors 12 through 18. The building's aging infrastructure, combined with recent seismic activity, had created a dangerous situation. Worse still, the evening cleaning crew and several overtime workers were trapped on the affected floors, with the main elevators automatically shut down and stairwells blocked by debris from minor collapses. Captain Rodriguez briefed the assembled response team in the building's lobby. "We've got 17 civilians trapped between floors 14 and 16. The building's smart security system locked down those levels when it detected structural instability, sealing the fire doors. The manual override is located in the building's central maintenance shaft, but there's a problem." He gestured toward the building schematics spread across a folding table. "The only access point to the override system is through the EVIFECA ventilation network. The main duct measures 18 inches by 14 inches, barely enough space for someone to crawl through. And it's a maze up there, with multiple branch points where someone could easily get lost or stuck." Sarah studied the blueprints while the SWAT team members examined their equipment. At 5 feet 2 inches and 118 pounds, she was by far the smallest officer present. Her colleagues often joked about her petite stature, how she had to adjust her patrol car seat all the way forward, how she sometimes needed a step stool to reach high shelves in the evidence room, how suspects occasionally underestimated her during arrests until they found themselves face down on the pavement. "Mitchell," Captain Rodriguez called out, "you're the only one here who might fit through those ducts. But I have to ask, are you comfortable with tight spaces? This isn't just crawling under a house. You'd be navigating through a vertical maze in a building that could experience further structural failure at any moment." Sarah felt the familiar weight of doubt in the room. She'd experienced it countless times before during her police academy training when instructors questioned whether someone her size could handle physical confrontations. During her first years on patrol when senior officers treated her like she needed constant protection. And even last month when she'd been passed over for a promotion to the robbery division because the lieutenant claimed she lacked the physical presence for high-stakes operations. But Sarah had something her colleagues didn't fully understand. Growing up as the youngest of 4 children in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, she'd learned to navigate impossibly tight spaces. Her childhood had been spent crawling under beds to retrieve lost toys, squeezing behind washing machines to fix loose connections, and exploring the narrow crawl spaces in her grandmother's old Victorian house. What others saw as a limitation, she'd learned to view as an advantage. "I can do it," she said simply. The building engineer, a nervous man named Thomas Chen, spread additional technical drawings across the table. "The ventilation system is more complex than typical buildings," he explained, his voice tight with worry. "When this tower was built in 1987, they installed a state-of-the-art climate control network. There are primary ducts, secondary branches, and emergency ventilation shafts. The manual override for the security system is located in the central mechanical room on the 10th floor, but reaching it requires navigating through approximately 400 feet of ductwork. He traced a path with his finger across the schematic. You'd enter through the roof access point, descend through the main vertical shaft to floor 15, then navigate horizontally through 3 separate duct branches. The override switch is behind a maintenance panel that can only be accessed from inside the mechanical room. Sarah examined the route carefully. The path twisted and turned through the building's skeleton like a 3-dimensional puzzle. There were multiple decision points where choosing the wrong direction would lead to dead ends or ducts too narrow to navigate. Worse, some sections required crawling through spaces barely larger than her body, with no room to turn around if she became disoriented. Officer Marcus Webb, a veteran SWAT team member, shook his head. "Sarah, I've got nothing but respect for you, but this is different from anything we've trained for. Those ducts are going to be pitch black, and if something goes wrong up there, if there's another structural failure or if you get stuck, we might not be able to get you out." The weight of 17 trapped lives pressed against Sarah's consciousness. Through the building's windows, she could see faces peering down from the affected floors: maintenance workers, security guards, a woman from the accounting department who'd been working late to meet a deadline. Some held flashlights, creating small beacons of light in the darkness. Others pressed their hands against the glass, their expressions mixing hope with fear. Fire Chief Amanda Torres arrived and immediately took charge of coordinating the rescue efforts. She'd been fighting fires for 15 years and had seen every type of emergency Portland could throw at her department. But this situation presented unique challenges that stretched beyond traditional firefighting protocols. "The building's structural integrity is deteriorating faster than we initially calculated," she announced grimly. "Our engineers estimate we have maybe 90 minutes before the affected floors become completely unstable. After that point, attempting any rescue becomes too dangerous for both the trapped civilians and our rescue teams." Sarah checked her watch. 11:52 p.m. 90 minutes felt both like an eternity, and no time at all. The equipment team fitted her with a specialized harness system designed for confined space rescue operations. The gear included a 2-way radio with an extended battery pack, a headlamp with backup lighting, knee and elbow pads for crawling through the ducts, and an emergency breathing apparatus in case she encountered smoke or poor air quality. The radio might cut out once you're deep inside the building, communications specialist Janet Rivers explained while testing the equipment. The metal ductwork can interfere with signals. "If we lose contact, don't panic. Stick to the planned route, find the override switch, and get those doors unlocked. We'll maintain our position here and continue trying to establish communication." As Sarah prepared for the ascent to the roof access point, she caught fragments of conversations around her. Some officers expressed confidence in her abilities, while others whispered concerns about sending someone so small into such a dangerous situation. The comments weren't meant to be hurtful. They came from genuine worry for her safety, but they reinforced the constant undercurrent of doubt that had followed her throughout her career. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, a structural engineer, called in to consult on the building's stability, pulled Sarah aside. "I need you to understand something," she said quietly. "If there's another seismic event while you're inside those ducts, the building's movement could cause the ductwork to shift or compress. Your size advantage could become a serious disadvantage if you become trapped in a space that's suddenly too small to navigate." Sarah nodded, fully understanding the risks. But she also understood that 17 people were counting on someone, anyone, to reach that override switch. And right now, she was the only person physically capable of attempting the rescue. Clock on the lobby wall read 12:03 a.m. as she headed toward the stairwell that would take her to the roof. The riverside financial tower stretched above her like a steel and glass mountain, its upper floors disappearing into the darkness of the Portland night. Somewhere in that vertical maze of concrete and metal, 17 people waited for a miracle. What Sarah didn't know was that her small hands and compact frame were about to become the most important tools in the most dangerous rescue operation of her career. The roof of the Riverside Financial Tower was a windswept landscape of mechanical equipment, ventilation units, and communication arrays. Sarah emerged from the stairwell access door at 12:14 a.m., immediately hit by the October chill and the distant sounds of the city 32 floors below. Portland's skyline stretched in every direction, but her attention focused entirely on the large rectangular grate that marked the entrance to the building's main ventilation shaft. Building maintenance supervisor Frank Delacruz had arrived to guide her through the initial entry. A man who'd worked on the tower's systems for over a decade, he possessed an intimate knowledge of every pipe, wire, and duct hidden within the building's walls. His weathered hands shook slightly as he removed the access panel, revealing the dark mouth of the ventilation system. This shaft drops straight down to the mechanical distribution level on floor 28, he explained, his voice competing with the wind. From there, you'll need to navigate laterally to reach the branch that connects to floor 15. The good news is that the main shaft is the largest duct in the system, 24 inches square. The challenging part comes when you have to transition to the smaller horizontal branches. Sarah peered into the opening, her headlamp beam disappearing into the darkness below. The shaft appeared to descend endlessly, its metal walls creating an echo chamber that amplified every sound. She could feel the building's AVEC system humming around her, a mechanical heartbeat that pulsed through the structure's skeleton. The building's blueprints show 3 connection points where horizontal ducts branch off from the main shaft. Frank continued, unfolding a detailed schematic. The first connection is at floor 28. That's your entry point to the lateral system. The second is at floor 22, but that leads to the executive offices that were evacuated hours ago. The third connection, at floor 15, is where you need to exit to reach the mechanical room. He pointed to specific locations on the diagram. Each connection point has a junction box with colored coding. Green means active airflow, yellow indicates reduced capacity, and red signals a sealed or blocked duct. You'll need to rely on these markers because once you're inside, everything will look identical. Sarah studied the route one final time, memorizing the sequence of turns and decision points. The path seemed straightforward on paper, but she understood that navigating through 3-dimensional space incomplete, darkness would present challenges no diagram could fully convey. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through her radio. "Mitchell, we've got an update from the structural engineers. They've detected increased stress readings on floors 14 and 16. The building is shifting more than anticipated, which means your window of opportunity is narrowing. We need you to move as quickly as safely possible." The implications were clear. Not only did she need to successfully navigate the ductwork maze, but she had to do so while the building itself was gradually destabilizing around her. Every minute that passed increased the risk of catastrophic structural failure. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah lowered herself feet first into the main shaft, her equipment harness allowing her to rappel slowly down the vertical tunnel. The metal walls felt cold against her palms as she controlled her descent, using a technique she'd learned during confined space rescue training. Her headlamp beam revealed a seemingly endless corridor stretching both above and below her position. The sounds of the city disappeared as she descended deeper into the building's interior. Instead, she found herself surrounded by the mechanical symphony of the VX system, fans humming at different frequencies, air moving through hidden passages, and the occasional groan of metal expanding and contracting with temperature changes. At floor 28, her light caught the first junction box Frank had described. The green indicator confirmed active airflow, and she could feel a steady breeze moving through the horizontal duct that branched off to her left. This was her transition point from the vertical shaft to the lateral navigation system. The horizontal duct immediately presented new challenges. While the vertical shaft had allowed her to maintain an upright position during her descent, the lateral branches required crawling on her hands and knees. The space measured 18 inches high by 20 inches wide, enough room for movement. But with no margin for error, Sarah began her horizontal journey, her knee pads scraping against the metal floor of the duct. Every few feet, she encountered obstacles, support brackets, sensor equipment, and junction points where smaller ducts branched off in different directions. Her training had prepared her for confined spaces, but nothing had quite replicated the disorienting experience of navigating through a building's hidden circulatory system. The radio communication became intermittent as she moved deeper into the structure. Occasional bursts of static brought fragments of updates from the command center, but long stretches passed in complete silence, except for the ambient sounds of the building's mechanical systems. After what felt like an eternity, but measured only 12 minutes on her watch, Sarah reached the first major decision point. The duct split into 3 separate branches, each leading in a different direction. According to her memorized route, she needed to take the middle passage, which would eventually connect to the vertical shaft system that would carry her down to floor 15. But as she examined the junction, her headlamp revealed a problem Frank hadn't mentioned. The middle duct showed signs of recent damage, possibly from the building's structural stress. Metal panels had shifted, creating a partially blocked passage that would be extremely difficult to navigate. Sarah keyed her radio. "Command, this is Mitchell. I've encountered an obstruction in the planned route. The middle branch at junction point Alpha is partially collapsed. I can see through to the other side, but it's going to be a tight squeeze." Static filled her earpiece before Captain Rodriguez's voice came through. "Mitchell, what are your alternatives? Can you take one of the other branches?" She examined the other options. The left branch appeared clear, but led away from her target direction. The right branch was unobstructed, but seemed to curve back toward the building's exterior wall, which wouldn't connect to the floor 15 mechanical room. "Negative on alternative routes," she reported. "I'm going to attempt to navigate through the obstruction. It looks like I can make it, but it's going to slow me down." What followed was the most challenging physical maneuver of Sarah's career. The partially collapsed duct created a space barely 14 inches high, requiring her to army crawl on her belly while pushing her equipment ahead of her. The jagged edges of bent metal caught at her clothing and equipment harness, and she had to carefully work her way through inch by inch. Her compact frame, which had been the subject of so many doubts and questions throughout her career, now became her greatest advantage. A larger person would have found the passage completely impassable. Even someone just a few inches taller or broader would have struggled to navigate through the compressed space dot as she emerged from the obstruction. Sarah checked her watch. 12:43 a.m. She'd been inside the ductwork for nearly 30 minutes, and she still had to descend to floor 15 and locate the mechanical room override switch. The awareness of 17 people depending on her success pressed against her. Consciousness like a physical weight. The next section of ductwork led to another vertical shaft, this one narrower than the main building shaft she'd initially descended. The space measured only 20 inches square, requiring her to descend in a controlled fall while using her feet and elbows to maintain friction against the walls. During the descent, she heard something that made her pause. Voices. Faint but unmistakable. Human voices were echoing up through the ductwork from somewhere below. It took her a moment to realize she was hearing the trapped civilians, their conversations carrying through the building's ventilation system. Double quotes. Been 3 hours now. You think they're really coming for us? The emergency broadcast said rescue teams were working on it. They'll figure something out. My daughter's probably worried sick. I was supposed to pick her up from soccer practice. The voices belonged to real people with families, responsibilities, and lives that hung in the balance. Sarah had trained herself to maintain professional detachment during emergency situations, but hearing the trapped civilians transformed them from abstract rescue targets into individuals with hopes and fears, she continued her descent with renewed determination. At floor 15, she located the horizontal branch that would take her toward the building's central mechanical room. This duct was the largest she'd encountered since the main shaft, allowing her to move more quickly despite her accumulated fatigue. The mechanical room access point appeared exactly where Frank's diagrams had indicated. Sarah found herself looking through a ventilation grate into a room filled with electrical panels, computer servers, and climate control equipment. Emergency lighting provided enough illumination for her to see the manual override switch that controlled the building's security lockdown system. But as she prepared to remove the grate and enter the mechanical room, her radio suddenly burst to life with urgent communication from the command center. All units, we've got a problem. The structural engineers are reporting accelerated deterioration on floor 16. We're seeing support beam failure that could trigger a progressive collapse. Mitchell, what's your status? Sarah examined the grate fasteners, realizing they required a specific tool to remove, a tool she hadn't brought with her equipment load. The oversight threatened to unravel the entire rescue operation, just as she'd reached her target. But her small hands, the same hands that colleagues had questioned as being too delicate for serious police work, allowed her to reach through the narrow spaces between the grate slats. By extending her fingers at impossible angles and using techniques that would have been physically impossible for someone with larger hands, she managed to manipulate the override switch from outside the mechanical room. The sound of electromagnetic locks disengaging echoed through the building as the security system released its hold on the trapped floors. Through the ventilation system, she could hear the distant sounds of people moving, voices calling out in relief, and the organized activity of rescue teams finally able to access the previously sealed areas. Command, this is Mitchell. Override. Success. The security doors are unlocked. The return journey through the ductwork passed in a blur of exhaustion and relief. Sarah's muscles ached from the prolonged crawling and climbing, and her equipment felt twice as heavy as it had at the beginning of the operation. But the knowledge that 17 people were being evacuated to safety provided energy that pushed her beyond her physical limitations. When she finally emerged from the roof access point at 1:31 a.m., the rescue operation was already well underway. Fire department ladders extended to the previously inaccessible floors, and she could see people being helped down to safety. Paramedics were treating minor injuries, but remarkably, all 17 trapped civilians had been successfully evacuated without serious harm. Captain Rodriguez was waiting for her on the roof. Mitchell, that was exceptional work. The building engineers estimate we had maybe 15 more minutes before the structural damage would have made evacuation impossible. Your size wasn't a limitation tonight. It was exactly what we needed. As they descended from the roof together, Sarah reflected on the night's events. Her petite stature and small hands had been criticized, questioned, and underestimated countless times throughout her career. Tonight, those same physical characteristics had been the key to saving 17 lives, but the night was far from over, and Sarah had no idea that her most challenging moments still lay ahead. The evacuation was proceeding smoothly when Detective Sarah Mitchell noticed something that made her blood run cold. As the rescued civilians gathered in the building lobby for medical evaluation, she conducted a quick head count. 16 people. The manifest clearly stated 17 trapped individuals. Captain Rodriguez, she called out urgently. We're missing someone. The captain immediately began cross-referencing the evacuation list with the original personnel manifest. Building Security Supervisor Linda Garrett rushed over with her tablet, scrolling through employee badge records and cleaning crew schedules. According to our system, maintenance worker Kevin Torres was scheduled to complete HVAC inspections on floor 14 tonight, Linda reported, her voice tight with concern. His badge shows he entered the building at 9:30 p.m., but there's no exit scan. Fire Chief Amanda Torres coordinated with her teams via radio. Alpha Team, did you encounter any individuals on floor 14 during the evacuation? Anyone who might have been separated from the main group? The response crackled back through static. Negative, Chief. Floor 14 appeared empty when we conducted our sweep. But visibility was limited due to emergency lighting, and some areas were blocked by debris from the structural damage. Dr. Elizabeth Harper approached with troubling news from the engineering team. The building's stability has deteriorated faster than our models predicted. We're now seeing critical stress indicators on floor 13 as well. The progressive failure is spreading upward through the structure. We have maybe 20 minutes before the entire section becomes completely unsafe for any rescue operations. Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. One person remained trapped somewhere in the building's failing. Infrastructure and traditional rescue methods were running out of time. The SWAT team's heavy equipment and standard rescue protocols weren't designed for navigating through a building that was actively collapsing around them. Building maintenance. Supervisor Frank Delacreu studied the HVAC system schematics with growing concern. If Kevin Torres was conducting inspections on floor 14, he would have been checking the auxiliary ventilation systems in the East Wing. Those ducts connect to a separate mechanical room that wasn't included in the main security lockdown. He pointed to a section of the building plans that showed a complex network of smaller ducts and maintenance passages. The auxiliary system was installed during the building's renovation in 2019. It's designed to provide climate control for the server rooms and telecommunications equipment. The passages are even smaller than the main HVAC system. Some sections are only 12 inches by 16 inches. Sarah examined the new route requirements. The auxiliary system would require navigating through spaces so confined that even her small frame would be pushed to its absolute limits. Unlike the main ventilation network, these ducts had multiple vertical drops, sharp turns, and sections where she would have to crawl through spaces barely larger than a large suitcase. The auxiliary mechanical room is located in the building's core, adjacent to the main elevator shaft, Frank continued. If Kevin is trapped in that area, he's probably unconscious from poor air circulation. The auxiliary system was designed for equipment cooling, not human occupancy. Carbon dioxide levels in those spaces can become dangerous very quickly. Captain Rodriguez shook his head. Mitchell, I can't ask you to go back in there. You've already risked your life once tonight, and the building is significantly less stable now than it was an hour ago. We need to consider the possibility that attempting another rescue could result in losing 2 people instead of saving 1. Sarah understood the captain's concerns, but she also understood that somewhere in the building's deteriorating structure, Kevin Torres was depending on someone to find him. The same small hands and compact frame that had enabled her to reach the security override switch were now the only tools capable of navigating the auxiliary ventilation system. I can do it, she said quietly. But I'm going to need different equipment for this route. The equipment team quickly assembled a modified gear load designed for extreme confined space rescue. The new harness was lighter and more flexible, allowing for greater mobility in tight spaces. They replaced her standard radio with a wireless bone conduction communication system that would maintain contact even when traditional radio signals couldn't penetrate the building's metal infrastructure. Emergency. Medical technician Robert Chun briefed her on the medical challenges she might encounter. If Kevin Torres has been trapped in a poorly ventilated space for several hours, he could be suffering from carbon dioxide poisoning, dehydration, or injuries from structural debris. He may be unconscious or disoriented, which will complicate any rescue attempt. The new entry point was located on the building's east side, accessed through a maintenance hatch that connected to the auxiliary system. Unlike the main HVAC network, this route began with an immediate horizontal crawl through a duct that measured only 14 inches high. Sarah began her second journey into the building's hidden infrastructure at 1:52 a.m. The auxiliary ventilation system felt completely different from the main network she'd navigated earlier. The spaces were more cramped, the air quality was noticeably poorer, and the sounds of the building's structural stress seemed amplified in the smaller confines. The initial horizontal section required her to belly crawl for nearly 50 feet, pushing her equipment ahead of her while navigating around sharp turns and vertical obstacles. Her headlamp revealed a maze of pipes, electrical conduits, and support brackets that created a three-dimensional obstacle course. Unlike the main system, the auxiliary network had been designed with minimal human access in mind. There were no junction boxes with colored coding, no clear pathway markers, and no straight sections that allowed for easy navigation. Every few feet presented a new challenge. A vertical drop that required careful climbing techniques, a sharp turn that demanded precise body positioning, or a space so narrow that she had to remove equipment from her harness to squeeze through. 23 minutes into the auxiliary system navigation, Sarah heard something that stopped her cold, a faint tapping sound echoing through the ductwork. The rhythm was deliberate. 3 short taps, pause, 3 more taps. Someone was using the metal ducts to transmit a signal. She immediately responded with the same pattern, tapping her flashlight against the duct wall. The response came back immediately, stronger and more urgent. Kevin Torres was conscious, aware, and trying to communicate his location. Following the sound led Sarah deeper into the building's core than she had traveled during her first rescue mission. The auxiliary system twisted through areas of the building she hadn't known existed, maintenance corridors, equipment rooms, and service passages that were hidden behind the walls of the office spaces above. The tapping grew stronger as she navigated through a particularly challenging section that required her to climb vertically through a shaft barely 16 inches square. Her equipment harness caught repeatedly on protruding brackets and pipe fittings, forcing her to stop and carefully work her way around each obstacle. At 2:31 a.m., Sarah's headlamp illuminated a junction where multiple ducts converged around a central maintenance area. The tapping sound was now coming from directly below her position, transmitted through the building's metal framework. According to Frank's schematics, this should be the location of the auxiliary mechanical room, but when she looked through the ventilation grate that should have provided access to the mechanical room, Sarah discovered a scene that hadn't appeared on any building diagram. The room had been severely damaged by the structural failure, with ceiling panels collapsed and equipment racks toppled over. Kevin Torres was trapped beneath a fallen server cabinet, conscious but unable to free himself. "Kevin, can you hear me?" she called through the grate. "Oh, thank God," came the weak response. "I've been trapped here for hours." The ceiling came down when the building started shaking. "I can't feel my left leg, and I think my arm might be broken." Sarah examined the situation carefully. The fallen server cabinet was too heavy for Kevin to move on his own, but it was also positioned in a way that prevented the ventilation grate from opening fully. Even if she could remove the grate, the opening was blocked by debris. The only access route to Kevin's location was through an equipment service panel located on the far side of the mechanical room. The panel opening measured 10 inches by 14 inches, smaller than any space she had navigated during either of her rescue missions. "Kevin, I need you to stay calm. I'm going to find another way to reach you, but it's going to take some time. Can you tell me about your injuries? My left leg is pinned under the cabinet, and I think my shoulder is dislocated. I'm having trouble staying focused. Everything feels fuzzy. The air in here is really stale. Sarah recognized the symptoms of carbon dioxide poisoning. Kevin's mental state was deteriorating due to poor air quality, which meant time was running out faster than she had anticipated. She needed to reach him quickly and establish better ventilation in the trapped space. The route to the equipment service panel required backing out of her current position and navigating through a section of ductwork she hadn't explored. The path led through the building's telecommunications equipment area, where dense clusters of cables and hardware created additional obstacles. As she crawled through the telecommunications section, Sarah's radio crackled with an urgent update. From the command center, Mitchell, we're showing increased structural movement on floors 13 and 14. The engineering team is recommending immediate evacuation of all rescue personnel from the building. Understood, Sarah replied. But I've located Kevin Torres, and he's injured and trapped. I'm almost in position to reach him. I need just a few more minutes. The equipment service panel was located exactly where Frank's diagrams had indicated. But accessing it required Sarah to navigate through the most confined space of her entire career. The opening was so small that she had to remove all of her equipment, except her headlamp and radio, pushing each item ahead of her as she squeezed through the passage inch by inch. Her shoulders barely fit through the opening, and she had to exhale completely to compress her chest enough to pass through the narrowest section. For a terrifying moment, she thought she might become stuck, but her small frame, the same physical characteristic that had been questioned and doubted throughout her career, allowed her to pass through a space that would have been impossible for anyone else to navigate. Sarah emerged into the damaged mechanical room at 2:47 a.m., immediately moving to Kevin's position. The server cabinet that had pinned his leg weighed approximately 200 pounds when fully loaded with equipment. Under normal circumstances, moving it would require multiple people or mechanical assistance, but Sarah had learned techniques during her police training that allowed her to use leverage and positioning to move objects that were much heavier than she could lift directly. By carefully placing a metal conduit as a fulcrum and using a piece of rack-mounting hardware as a lever, she was able to shift the cabinet enough for Kevin to pull his leg free. "Can you move?" she asked as she helped him sit up. "I think so. My leg is numb, but I can put some weight on it. My shoulder really hurts though." Sarah quickly assessed Kevin's condition. His left shoulder was indeed dislocated, and his leg showed signs of significant bruising, but no obvious fractures. More concerning was his altered mental state from prolonged exposure to poor air quality. "We need to get you out of here immediately. The building is becoming increasingly unstable, and this room doesn't have adequate ventilation. Can you follow me through a very tight space?" Kevin looked at the equipment service panel opening with obvious concern. "I don't think I can fit through there, especially with my shoulder injury." Sarah realized that Kevin's larger frame and injured condition made the route she had used to enter the mechanical room impossible for his evacuation. She needed to find an alternative path that would accommodate his size and physical limitations. Examining the room more carefully, she discovered that the structural damage had actually created an unexpected opportunity. A section of the wall had partially collapsed, revealing access to a maintenance corridor that connected to the building's main elevator shaft. The opening was large enough for Kevin to pass through, but reaching it required crossing an area where debris from the ceiling collapse had created an unstable pile of broken concrete and twisted metal. "Kevin, I'm going to help you across to that opening. The floor is unstable, so we need to move carefully but quickly. Can you put your good arm around my shoulders?" Working together, they navigated across the debris field to reach the maintenance corridor. Kevin's weight and injuries made the crossing challenging, but Sarah's training in emergency victim assistance provided techniques for supporting and guiding injured individuals through difficult terrain. The maintenance corridor led to a service elevator that was still functioning despite the building's structural problems. As they rode down to the ground floor, Sarah checked her watch. 2:58 a.m. The entire second rescue operation had taken just over an hour, but it felt like she had been inside the building's hidden passages for days. When the elevator doors opened, in the lobby, the assembled rescue teams erupted in cheers and applause. Kevin Torres was immediately surrounded by paramedics who began treating his injuries, while Captain Rodriguez approached Sarah with an expression of amazement and respect. "Mitchell, what you accomplished tonight goes beyond anything I've seen. In 25 years of law enforcement, 18 people are alive because you were willing to go where no one else could go." But as Sarah looked around the lobby at the rescued civilians, the exhausted rescue teams, and the building that continued to groan and settle around them, she realized that her small hands had proven something far more significant than just their usefulness in confined spaces. They had proven that physical characteristics that society often viewed as limitations could become the most valuable assets in the right circumstances. 3 weeks after the Riverside Financial Tower rescue, Detective Sarah Mitchell was sitting in the Portland Police Bureau's conference room, staring at a promotion letter that would change the trajectory of her entire career. The letter had read Major Crimes Division, the same elite unit that had passed her over just months earlier for lacking physical presence. Lieutenant Commander Janet Walsh slid a second document across the polished conference table. "The FBI has also submitted a formal recruitment request. They're specifically interested in your expertise in confined space operations and crisis management. Apparently, word about the tower rescue has reached some very high places in federal law enforcement." Sarah examined both offers carefully. The Major Crimes Division promotion would mean a significant salary increase, better benefits, and the respect she'd been working toward for 8 years. The FBI opportunity represented something even more substantial, a chance to work on national security cases that required her unique skill set, but neither opportunity fully captured what Sarah had discovered about herself during those terrifying hours inside the Riverside Financial Tower. Her small hands hadn't just been useful tools for navigating tight spaces, they had been the key to developing an entirely new approach to rescue operations that no one had previously considered. Captain Rodriguez entered the conference room carrying a thick folder marked "Confidential." He settled into a chair across from Sarah and opened the file, revealing photographs, technical diagrams, and official reports from multiple government agencies. "Sarah, what I'm about to show you is classified at the federal level. 3 days ago, a chemical processing facility in Seattle experienced a catastrophic equipment failure. Toxic gases leaking from damaged pipes located inside the facility's containment system, spaces that are too small and too dangerous for traditional hazmat teams to access." He spread the photographs across the table. The images showed an industrial complex with massive concrete structures, intricate piping systems, and warning signs indicating various chemical hazards. Sarah could see areas where emergency personnel in protective suits were maintaining safe perimeters around buildings they couldn't actually enter. The EPA estimates that if the leak continues for another 48 hours, it could contaminate the groundwater supply for nearly 200,000 people in the Seattle metropolitan area. The financial impact would be in the billions, and the environmental damage could last for decades. Dr. Rebecca Martinez from the Environmental Protection Agency joined the meeting via secure video conference. Her expression was grave as she explained the technical challenges facing the cleanup effort. The damaged pipes are located within a concrete containment structure that was designed to prevent exactly this type of leak. Unfortunately, the same design features that make it effective for containment also make it nearly impossible for repair teams to access. The entry points are circular openings that measure just 12 inches in diameter. Sarah studied the technical specifications Dr. Martinez shared on screen. The containment structure was essentially a concrete maze with multiple chambers connected by narrow tunnels. The damaged piping was located in the deepest section of the system, requiring navigation through over 300 feet of confined passages while wearing full chemical protection equipment. Traditional hazmat suits are too bulky for these spaces, Dr. Martinez continued. We've consulted with specialist teams from around the country, but no one has the combination of small physical stature and advanced confined space training necessary to attempt this type of repair operation. Captain Rodriguez leaned forward. Sarah, they're specifically requesting you for this operation. Your performance at the Riverside Tower has established you as the leading expert in confined space rescue operations. But I need to be completely transparent about the risks involved. He pulled out additional documents that detailed the chemical hazards present at the Seattle facility. The leaking substance was a corrosive industrial solvent that could cause severe respiratory damage, even with protective equipment. Exposure to concentrated vapors could result in permanent lung injury or death within minutes. The repair operation would require you to crawl through the containment system while wearing a specialized breathing apparatus and chemical protective suit. The spaces are so confined that if your equipment malfunctioned, rescue teams wouldn't be able to reach you in time to provide assistance. Sarah absorbed the information carefully. The Seattle operation would be exponentially more dangerous than anything she had attempted at the Riverside Tower. The building rescue had involved physical challenges and structural hazards, but the chemical facility presented toxic threats that could be immediately fatal. What's the repair procedure? She asked. Dr. Martinez explained the technical requirements. The damaged section is a junction where 3 pipes connect to a main distribution line. The leak is caused by corrosion that has created a hole approximately 2 inches in diameter. The repair involves installing a specialized clamp system that will seal the opening and prevent further chemical release. She shared additional technical diagrams showing the exact location of the damage within the containment structure. The repair site was located in the most inaccessible area of the system, a chamber that could only be reached by crawling through 4 separate tunnel sections, each presenting unique challenges. The repair procedure itself should take approximately 15 minutes once you reach the damaged pipe, but navigating to the location and back could require 3 hours or more, depending on the conditions you encounter inside the containment system. Federal Emergency Management Coordinator David Thompson joined the conversation from FEM ACE Regional Headquarters. His background included oversight of some of the most complex disaster response operations in recent history, and his assessment of the Seattle situation was unambiguous. This is a national-level environmental emergency. If we can't stop the leak within the next 2 days, we're looking at mandatory evacuations for several Seattle neighborhoods, long-term contamination of water supplies, and potential health impacts for hundreds of thousands of people. Sarah recognized the weight of responsibility being placed on her shoulders. The Riverside Tower rescue had involved 18 lives hanging in balance. The Seattle chemical facility operation could affect an entire metropolitan area. I need to understand the specific challenges I'll face inside the containment system, she said. What conditions am I looking at in terms of visibility, air quality, and physical obstacles? Dr. Martinez consulted her technical reports. Visibility will be extremely limited due to chemical vapors, even with proper lighting equipment. The air inside the system is toxic and corrosive, so you'll be dependent on your breathing apparatus for the entire operation. Temperature inside. The containment structure is estimated at around 95 degrees Fahrenheit due to heat generated by the chemical reactions. She paused to reference additional data. Physical obstacles include sharp edges from corroded metal components, pools of leaked chemicals that could compromise your protective equipment, and structural supports that create narrow bottlenecks. Throughout the tunnel system, the protective equipment requirements added another layer of complexity to the operation. The chemical suit necessary for protection against the toxic environment was bulkier and less flexible than the gear Sarah had worn during the building rescue. The breathing apparatus added weight and reduced her range of motion while specialized. Gloves designed for chemical protection would make fine motor tasks more challenging. The suit and breathing equipment will add approximately 25 pounds to your body weight, explained hazmat specialist Dr. Angela Foster. More critically, the bulk of the protective gear will reduce the effective size of spaces you can navigate through. Some passages that might be accessible without protection gear could become impassable while wearing full chemical protection. Sarah requested detailed measurements of every tunnel section she would need to traverse. The narrowest point in the route measured just 14 inches by 16 inches, barely larger than the spaces she had navigated at the Riverside Tower. But now she would be wearing bulky protective equipment that would fill nearly every available inch. "There's one more factor you need to consider," Captain Rodriguez added grimly. The containment structure was damaged during the initial chemical leak. The concrete walls show stress fractures, and some sections are showing signs of deterioration from chemical exposure. There's a possibility that the structure could experience further damage while you're inside. The implications were clear. Unlike the building rescue, where structural failure would have meant being trapped in familiar spaces with potential rescue access, structural failure inside the chemical containment system could mean being buried alive in a toxic environment. With no possibility of outside assistance, Sarah spent the next hour reviewing every technical specification, studying photographs of the containment system interior, and consulting with specialists about the repair procedures she would need to perform. The operation was far more complex than anything she had previously attempted, but her experience at the Riverside Tower had taught her that challenges that seemed impossible often had solutions that became apparent only when viewed from unique perspectives. "I'll do it," she finally announced. "But I want to make some modifications to the standard approach." Dr. Martinez looked surprised. "What kind of modifications?" "The current plan assumes I'll be working alone inside the containment system. But what if we established a communication and supply line? My small size means I can navigate through spaces that would be impossible for others, but I don't have to be completely isolated during the operation." Sarah outlined her concept. A lightweight communication cable and emergency air supply line could be fed through the tunnel system behind her, providing backup life support and maintaining contact with the support team throughout the operation. The additional equipment would add complexity, but it would also create safety redundancies that could prevent a single equipment failure from becoming fatal. The supply line would need to be specially designed for the chemical environment, Dr. Foster noted. "But the concept is sound. It would give us the ability to provide emergency assistance and monitor your condition throughout the operation." Federal coordination began immediately. Specialized equipment was flown in from hazmat facilities around the country, while chemical engineering experts developed detailed procedures for the pipe repair operation. Sarah underwent intensive training with the protective equipment and practiced the repair procedures repeatedly until she could perform them efficiently, even while wearing bulky gloves. The flight to Seattle departed Portland at 6:30 a.m. on a gray October morning. As Sarah looked down at the city from the aircraft window, she reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. 3 weeks earlier, she had been a detective whose physical stature was seen as a career limitation. Now she was being called upon to prevent an environmental disaster that could affect hundreds of thousands of people. The chemical processing facility was located in an industrial area south of Seattle, surrounded by emergency vehicles, mobile command centers, and teams of specialists from multiple federal agencies. The scale of the operation dwarfed anything Sarah had experienced during the building Dr. Martinez met her at the facility entrance and provided a final briefing on the current conditions inside the containment system. The chemical leak has stabilized at current levels, but we're detecting increased corrosion around the damaged area. The window for successful repair is narrowing. We estimate another 12 hours before the damage becomes too extensive for the clamp system to be effective. Sarah examined the containment structure entrance, a circular opening in a massive concrete wall that looked more like the Benventum. A circular opening in a massive concrete wall that looked more like the containment structure entrance. A circular opening in a massive concrete wall, entrance to a bank vault, then a repair access point. The opening was just large enough for her to pass through while wearing the protective equipment with no margin for error. Once you're inside, there's no turning back until you complete the repair, Dr. Martinez warned. The tunnel configuration makes it impossible to reverse direction until you reach the central chamber where the damaged pipe is located. At 10:47 a.m., Sarah entered the chemical containment system that would either establish her as the most accomplished confined space specialist in the country or become her final assignment. Her small hands, wrapped in chemical-resistant gloves, gripped the specialized tools that represented the only hope for preventing an environmental catastrophe that could affect an entire city. What she discovered inside the containment system would challenge everything she thought she knew about the limits of human capability in extreme environments. The interior of the chemical containment system was unlike anything Sarah had encountered during her previous rescue operations. The concrete walls were stained with chemical residue that created an abstract pattern of corrosion and discoloration, while overhead lighting cast eerie shadows through the toxic haze that filled the tunnels. Her specialized breathing apparatus created a rhythmic hissing sound with each breath, and the bulk of her chemical protection suit made every movement deliberate and calculated. The communication cable she had requested snaked behind her through the tunnel, providing a vital link to the support team monitoring her progress from the surface. "Mitchell, we're receiving your vital signs clearly." Dr. Martinez's voice crackled through the helmet communication system. "Heart rate is elevated, but stable. How's your visibility there?" Sarah examined the tunnel ahead through her protective faceplate. The chemical vapors created a fog-like atmosphere that limited her visibility to just a few feet, despite the powerful LED lighting system built into her helmet. Every surface appeared slick with condensed chemicals, creating treacherous conditions that required extreme caution with each movement. "Visibility is poor, but manageable," she reported. "The tunnel walls show significant chemical damage. I can see areas where the concrete has been eaten away by acid exposure. This system is in worse condition than the technical reports indicated." The first tunnel section measured 16 inches high by 18 inches wide, barely large enough for her protected form to pass through. Unlike the building ventilation system, these passages had been designed for pipe access, not human navigation. Sharp metal brackets, protruding valve handles, and corroded pipe fittings created obstacles that could puncture her protective suit if she wasn't extremely careful. 15 minutes into the operation, Sarah encountered her first major challenge. A section of the tunnel ceiling had partially collapsed, creating a bottleneck that reduced the available space to just 12 inches of clearance. Chemical residue had pooled in the area, forming a corrosive soup that could eat through her protective equipment if she made contact. "Support team, I've got a significant obstruction at the first junction point. Ceiling collapse has created a very tight squeeze, and there's pooled chemical contamination I need to navigate around." Dr. Foster's voice came through the communication system with obvious concern. "Mitchell, can you estimate the chemical concentration in that area? Your suit's protection rating has limits, and prolonged exposure to concentrated acids could compromise the integrity of your equipment." Sarah examined her suit's chemical detection sensors. The readings showed contamination levels that were approaching the maximum exposure limits for her protective equipment. Spending too much time in the area could result in suit failure, but there was no alternative route to reach the damaged pipe. I'm reading high contamination levels, but still within acceptable ranges for brief exposure. I'm going to move through this section as quickly as possible. What followed was the most physically demanding maneuver of Sarah's career. She had to compress her body to fit through the 12-inch opening while simultaneously avoiding contact with the pooled chemicals below. The bulk of her protective suit made the passage even more challenging, requiring her to exhale completely and use precise body positioning to squeeze through the narrowed space. Her small frame, enhanced by years of training in confined space. Navigation allowed her to pass through the obstruction in just under 3 minutes. A larger person wearing the same protective equipment would have found the passage completely impossible. Regardless of their skill level, the second tunnel section presented different challenges. While the space was slightly larger, the chemical damage to the infrastructure was more severe. Pipes had corroded completely through in several locations, creating sharp metal edges that could slice through protective equipment. The air quality. Sensors in her breathing apparatus detected toxic gas concentrations that would be immediately fatal without protection. I'm seeing extensive infrastructure damage in Tunnel 2, Sarah reported. Multiple pipe failures have created hazardous debris fields. I'm having to navigate around areas where the flooring has been completely eaten away by chemical exposure. 28 minutes into the operation, her communication system began experiencing interference from the chemical environment. Dr. Martinez's voice became intermittent, broken by static and distortion that made clear communication increasingly difficult. Mitchell. Can you? Status report, chemical levels. Support team, I'm losing communication clarity. My position is approximately halfway through Tunnel 2, proceeding toward the central chamber. All systems are functioning within normal parameters. The third tunnel section required Sarah to navigate through a space that had been significantly altered by chemical damage. What had originally been designed as a straight passage now resembled a three-dimensional obstacle course with collapsed sections, twisted metal, and chemical formations that had created entirely new geometries within the confined space. Her helmet lighting revealed formations that looked almost geological chemical deposits that had built up over time, creating stalactite-like structures hanging from the tunnel ceiling. Some of these formations were still actively dripping corrosive substances, requiring her to time her movements to avoid exposure. The repair tools attached to her equipment harness began to feel significantly heavier as fatigue accumulated from the demanding physical exertion. The specialized clamp system she carried weighed 12 pounds and had to be carefully maneuvered through each tight space without damaging the precision-calibrated components. At the 45-minute mark, Sarah reached the entrance to the central chamber where the damaged pipe was located. The opening was circular, measuring just 14 inches in diameter, the smallest space she would need to navigate during the entire operation. But this opening was also the point of no return. Once she passed through, there would be no way to retreat until the repair was completed. Support team, I've reached the central chamber access point. I'm about to enter the final phase of the operation. If you can hear this transmission, the repair sequence will begin in approximately 2 minutes. The communication system produced only static in response. Sarah was now completely isolated, dependent entirely on her own skills and the reliability of her protective equipment to complete the mission and return safely to the surface. She squeezed through the circular opening into the central chamber, immediately confronting the source of the environmental crisis. The damaged pipe junction was larger than she had expected from the technical diagrams, with chemical leakage creating a localized, toxic environment that was far more dangerous than anything she had encountered in the approach tunnels. The pipe itself was a massive steel structure, over 2 feet in diameter, with the damage located at a junction point where 3 smaller lines connected to the main distribution system. The hole caused by corrosion was irregular in shape, approximately 3 inches across at its widest point, and chemical fluid was actively spraying from the opening under high pressure. Sarah's protective equipment immediately registered exposure levels that were at the absolute maximum of her suit's protection capabilities. She had perhaps 20 minutes to complete the repair before her equipment could no longer provide adequate protection against the toxic environment. The specialized clamp system required precise installation procedures that were challenging under ideal conditions. In the toxic environment of the central chamber, wearing bulky protective gloves and working with limited visibility, the repair became an exercise in applied engineering that pushed her technical skills to their limits. First step involved cleaning the area around the damage to ensure proper clamp adhesion. This required using specialized solvents that were themselves highly dangerous, creating additional toxic vapors that strained her breathing apparatus filtration systems. Working methodically despite the time pressure, Sarah applied the cleaning solution and began the delicate process of positioning the primary clamp components. The clamp system consisted of multiple interlocking pieces that had to be aligned precisely to create an effective seal against the high-pressure chemical flow. Her small hands, which had been questioned and doubted throughout her career, now became the critical factor in the repair operation's success. The clamp installation required reaching into confined spaces around the pipe junction where larger hands would have been unable to access the mounting points. 12 minutes into the repair sequence, Sarah encountered a problem that hadn't appeared in any of the training scenarios. One of the clamp mounting brackets had been damaged by chemical corrosion, making it impossible to achieve the precise alignment necessary for an effective seal. With no communication link to the surface support team, she had to develop an improvised solution using the materials available in her equipment kit. Using a technique she had learned during her mechanical training, she fabricated a temporary bracket using spare mounting hardware and chemical-resistant adhesive. The improvised repair required working in a position where chemical spray was directly hitting her protective equipment. Her suit's exposure sensors registered contamination levels that exceeded safe operating parameters, but stopping the repair at this point would mean mission failure and potential environmental catastrophe for hundreds of thousands of people. Sarah completed the clamp installation at the 18-minute mark, just as her protective equipment began showing signs of chemical degradation. The specialized seals were holding, but she could see areas where the corrosive environment was beginning to compromise her suit's integrity. The moment the final clamp component locked into position, the high-pressure chemical spray stopped. The repair was successful. The toxic leak that had threatened to contaminate Seattle's water supply was finally contained, but Sarah's relief was tempered by the realization that her protective equipment was failing faster than anticipated. The return journey through the contaminated tunnel system would require at least 40 minutes, and her suit's protection was already compromised from the extended exposure in the central chamber. The return navigation proved even more challenging than the initial approach. Chemical fatigue had reduced her physical capabilities, while degradation of her protective equipment meant that every movement carried increased risk of catastrophic exposure to the toxic environment. Her breathing apparatus began showing irregular pressure readings during the transit through Tunnel 3. The filtration system was struggling to process the concentrated chemical vapors, and she could detect a slight chemical taste that suggested her protective seals were beginning to fail. In Tunnel 2, Sarah encountered a new hazard that hadn't been present during her initial passage. The repair operation had apparently shifted pressure dynamics within the containment system, causing previously stable chemical deposits to become active. Corrosive substances were now dripping from areas that had been safe during her approach. The damaged area she had navigated during her initial entry was now significantly more dangerous. The pooled chemicals had increased in volume and concentration, creating a toxic lake that blocked the normal passage route. Sarah had to find an alternative path that involved climbing over corroded pipe supports while avoiding contact with the contaminated surfaces below. Her protective equipment finally began catastrophic failure during the final tunnel section. Chemical alarms were sounding continuously inside her helmet, and she could feel corrosive vapors beginning to penetrate her suit's compromised seals. Every breath became a calculated risk as her breathing apparatus struggled to provide clean air. At 12:34 p.m., after spending 1 hour and 47 minutes inside the chemical containment system, Sarah emerged from the entrance portal into the bright Seattle sunlight. Decontamination teams immediately surrounded her, beginning emergency procedures to neutralize chemical contamination and assess her exposure levels. Dr. Martinez rushed to her side as the protective equipment was carefully removed. "Sarah, the repair was completely successful. Chemical flow has stopped, and our sensors show containment levels dropping rapidly. You've prevented an environmental disaster that could have affected over 200,000 people." But the true measure of Sarah's achievement wasn't just in the technical success of the operation. She had proven that physical characteristics traditionally viewed as limitations could become the foundation for capabilities that no one else possessed. Her small hands and compact frame had allowed her to access spaces and perform tasks that were impossible for conventional approaches. The medical evaluation following Sarah's emergence from the containment system revealed the extent of chemical exposure she had endured. Dr. Patricia Williams, the lead toxicologist, examined the test results with growing amazement rather than concern. "Somehow, your protective equipment held up better than our computer models predicted," she explained while reviewing Sarah's blood work. "You should have experienced significant chemical burns and respiratory damage, but your exposure levels are well within safe ranges. The modifications you suggested for the communication line actually created additional ventilation that helped filter the toxic atmosphere." What Dr. Williams didn't immediately recognize was that Sarah's small lung capacity had actually worked as an advantage during the operation. She required less oxygen than a larger person, which meant her breathing apparatus lasted longer and processed air more efficiently through the compromised filtration systems. Environmental Protection Agency Director Michael Santos arrived in Seattle that evening to personally assess the containment operation's success. His preliminary report to Federal Emergency Management indicated that the chemical leak posed no further threat to public health or environmental safety. The repair work completed today prevented what could have been the worst industrial environmental disaster in Pacific Northwest history, Director Santos announced during a press conference. The estimated cleanup costs if the leak had continued would have exceeded $12 billion, with environmental impacts lasting decades. But the Seattle operation's success created unexpected challenges for Sarah's career trajectory. Within days of returning to Portland, she began receiving requests from government agencies, private corporations, and international organizations facing similar confined space emergencies. The first request came from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. A spent fuel storage facility in Nevada was experiencing cooling system failures in areas accessible only through maintenance tunnels measuring less than 18 inches in diameter. Traditional robotic repair systems were too large for the access points, and radiation levels made prolonged human exposure extremely dangerous. "We're looking at a potential nuclear incident that could require evacuating Las Vegas if we can't restore cooling to the spent fuel pools," explained NRC Emergency Coordinator Dr. James Patterson during a classified briefing. "Your success in Seattle has established you as the only person in the country with the physical capabilities and technical training necessary for this type of operation. The nuclear facility assignment would require Sarah to work in an environment where even brief equipment failure could result in lethal radiation exposure. Unlike chemical contamination, which could be treated medically, radiation poisoning would cause irreversible damage that could prove fatal within hours. Captain Rodriguez presented Sarah with a difficult choice during a private meeting in his office. "Sarah, I need to be honest with you about what's happening. Your success in these extreme rescue operations is creating a situation where you're becoming the go-to person for missions that no one else can physically accomplish. But each operation is more dangerous than the last." He spread out classified requests that had arrived from various agencies. Besides the nuclear facility operation, there were requests from the Coast Guard for underwater confined space rescues, from the Forest Service for cave rescue operations in collapsed mine shafts, and from the State Department for hostage extractions in foreign countries, where conventional assault teams couldn't access target locations. "You're literally writing the book on confined space rescue operations," Captain Rodriguez continued. "But I'm concerned about the psychological and physical toll these operations are taking. You've proven your capabilities beyond any doubt, but continuing to accept increasingly dangerous assignments could eventually prove fatal." Sarah understood his concerns, but she also recognized that her unique abilities created responsibilities that extended beyond her personal safety. The Seattle chemical facility operation had demonstrated that certain emergency situations could only be resolved by someone with her specific physical characteristics and specialized training. The decision-making process was complicated by Sarah's growing understanding of how her unconventional career path was inspiring other law enforcement professionals who didn't fit traditional expectations. Letters began arriving from female officers around the country who had faced similar challenges related to physical requirements and societal assumptions about police work. Officer Maria Gonzalez from the Los Angeles Police Department wrote, "Your example has changed how I approach my career limitations. I'm 5'1", and have always been told I'm too small for tactical operations. But after reading about your rescue operations, I've started training for specialized assignments that actually benefit from my size rather than being hindered by it." Similar correspondence arrived from officers with various physical characteristics that had traditionally been viewed as career limitations. Sarah realized that her success was creating opportunities for others to redefine how physical diversity could enhance law enforcement capabilities rather than restricting them. The nuclear facility operation in Nevada took place 6 weeks after the Seattle chemical rescue. The assignment required Sarah to navigate through contaminated cooling system tunnels while wearing radiation protection equipment that was even more restrictive than the chemical suit she had used previously. The nuclear operation's success led to international recognition that transformed Sarah's role from local police detective to global specialist in extreme confined space operations. The United Nations requested her assistance with a nuclear reactor crisis in Eastern Europe, while the International Red Cross sought her expertise for earthquake rescue operations in regions where traditional equipment couldn't access trapped SURVIVORS. Dr. Elizabeth Chun, a behavioral psychologist specializing in extreme stress management, began working with Sarah to develop psychological preparation techniques for these unique operational challenges. Her research would eventually establish protocols for training other specialists in ultra-confined space rescue operations. "What makes Sarah unique isn't just her physical stature," Dr. Chun explained during a presentation to the International Association of Fire Chiefs. She's developed cognitive approaches to spatial navigation and problem-solving under extreme stress that can be taught to others with similar physical characteristics. "We're essentially developing a new specialty within emergency response operations." The training program Dr. Chen developed began attracting candidates from around the world. Men and women with naturally small frames started arriving in Portland for specialized instruction in confined space rescue techniques. Sarah found herself becoming not just a practitioner of these operations, but the founding instructor for an entirely new field of emergency response. The psychological impact of Sarah's career. Transformation extended beyond professional recognition. Her childhood experiences of feeling physically inadequate for traditional expectations had been completely recontextualized by her rescue operations. The same characteristics that had once made her feel self-conscious now made her uniquely valuable for protecting others in situations no one else could handle. During a keynote address at the National Emergency Response Conference, Sarah reflected on the unexpected path her career had taken. 5 years ago, I was a detective whose supervisors questioned whether I had the physical presence for serious police work. Today, I'm being asked to develop training programs for specialized rescue operations that only people with my physical characteristics can perform. The conference audience included emergency response professionals from every major city in North America, many of whom were implementing new protocols based on techniques Sarah had developed. Her influence was reshaping how emergency response organizations approached personnel selection and specialized operations. The Seattle Chemical Facility operation had been commemorated with a bronze plaque that read, "On this date, Detective Sarah Mitchell prevented an environmental catastrophe through courage, skill, and the recognition that heroism comes in all sizes." But the plaque represented more than just recognition of a single rescue operation. It marked the beginning of a fundamental shift in how society understood the relationship between physical characteristics and professional capabilities. 3 months later, Detective Sarah Mitchell received a presidential commendation for her role in preventing the Seattle environmental disaster. But more importantly, she had established an entirely new field of specialized rescue operations that would save countless lives in future emergencies. Standing in the White House Rose Garden, receiving recognition from the President of the United States, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Her small hands, once questioned as inadequate for police work, had become instruments of national service that protected hundreds of thousands of people from disasters that conventional approaches couldn't address. The woman whose hands had once been called too small for serious work had shown the world that greatness comes not from fitting conventional expectations, but from the courage to turn perceived weaknesses into extraordinary strengths. Her small hands had become the tools that proved heroism comes in all sizes, and that the most valuable capabilities are often found in the most unexpected places. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.